Hi, Cubs. It's Miss Candleberry. And while I make this focus, let's talk really quickly about the question that I asked you yesterday, and then five of you. So thank you, my friends who answered. Which was I asked you this question. What do you think Norton Juster is trying to say when he wrote this? For if we listen carefully to sounds, we can sometimes tell things far better than words. Oh no, wait, I'm sorry, that's not what it says. It says, "For if we listen to sounds carefully, they can sometimes tell us things far better than words." So that's the quote I asked you about, and asked you what you think Norton Juster wanted you to learn from that. Oh, we got some good answers. Nishvita says sometimes sounds can be better than words, and both Sarvanch and Trinity agreed with her. Diley says it is better to pay attention to everything around us. Now, Diley, I think that you're talking about something complicated, which is called a theme, and we'll talk about that later. But that paying attention to things, paying attention has popped up. Think about how many times we've had paying attention popping up. Like paying attention to things that are going on around us in the world or everything around us. That's popped up so many times, right? So you're right, that could fit. Mason says like sounds can help explain words, right? So I think for Miss Candleberry, it's saying that sometimes when we hear a sound, it tells us more about how a person is feeling or what's going on than just words would. For example, if you're sitting in your apartment and you hear a siren go off, you know that someone has an emergency, right? Or if you are, oh, this is my favorite. So if I am sitting here and my cat is meowing at me, I know that my cat, because my cat doesn't meow often, must really want me to pay attention to my cat, right? I'm sure that if your dog is barking when someone is barking and they're standing near the door, then you know that somebody is probably nearby, right? Or you could, if a baby is crying, right? But there's also beautiful sounds, like if you hear a lot of birds singing, then you know that you must have birds nesting somewhere nearby. And you can love that. Or if you hear somebody humming a happy tune, you know that they're in a good mood, right? So sometimes sounds tell us a little bit more about what's going on around us than words might. And I think that that's kind of what it's getting at. That you could also learn a lot from sounds, not just words. Sounds are also very important. So here we are, which is interesting because we had King Azaz who, words were the most important thing. And now we get to somebody else where words are not the most important thing to them, sounds are. So let's read and find out what happened with that little butt. Ooh, that's kind of a scary picture. With his mouth shut tight and his feet moving as fast as thoughts could make them, Milo ran all the way back to the car. There was a great excitement when he arrived, as Talk raced happily down the road to greet him. The humbug personally accepted all congratulations from the crowd. "Where is the sound?" Someone hastily scribbled on the blackboard, and they all waited anxiously for the reply. Milo caught his breath, picked up the chalk, and explained simply, "It's on the tip of my tongue." Several people excitedly threw their hats into the air. Some shouted, which would have been the loudest hurrah, and the rest pushed the heavy cannon into place. They aimed it directly at the thickest part of the fortress wall and packed it full of gunpowder. Milo stood on tiptoe, leaned over into the cannon's mouth, and parted his lips. The small sound dropped silently to the bottom, and everything was ready. Another moment, the fuse was lit and sputtering. "I hope no one gets hurt," thought Milo, and before he had time to think again, an immense cloud of gray and white smoke leaped from the gun, and along from it, so softly that it was hardly heard, came the sound of "Bud." Look how little it is, "Bud." So it was really quiet. It flew toward the wall for several seconds in a high, lazy arc, then struck ever so lightly just to the right of the big door. For an instant there was an ominous stillness, quieter and more silent than ever before, as if the air was holding its breath. And then, almost immediately, There was a blasting, roaring, thundering smash, followed by a crushing, shattering, bursting crash, as every stone in the fortress came toppling to the ground and the vaults burst open, spilling the sounds of history into the wind. Well, that's kind of sad that they're all gone now, right? Every sound that had ever been uttered or made, from way back when there were none to way up to when there were too many, came hurtling out of the debris in a way that sounded as though everyone in the world was laughing, whistling, shouting, crying, singing, whispering, humming, screaming, coughing, and sneezing, all at the same time. There were bits of old speeches floating around, as well as recited lessons, gunshots from old wars, babies' cries, auto horns, waterfalls, electric fans, galloping horses, and a great deal of everything else. For a while there was a total and deafening confusion, and then, almost as quickly as they'd come, all the old sounds disappeared over the hill in search of their new freedom, and things were normal again. The people quickly went about their busy talkative business. Excuse me. And as the smoke and dust cleared, only Milo, Talk, and the Humbug, there they are, noticed the soundkeeper sitting disconsolately on a pile of rubble. So there she is, right? And it looks like she's crying. You might not be able to see, but I gotta see. There's a little tear right by her. "I'm terribly sorry," said Milo sympathetically as the three of them went to console her. "But we had to do it," added Talk, sniffing around the ruins. "What a terrible mess," observed the Humbug, with his knack for saying the exactly wrong thing. The soundkeeper looked around with an expression of unrelieved sadness on her unhappy face. "It will take years to collect all those sounds again," she sobbed, "and even longer to put them back in proper order. But it's all my fault, for you can't improve sound by only having silence. The problem is to use each at the proper time." As she spoke, the familiar and unmistakable squish, squash, squinch, swash of the den's heavy footsteps could be heard plodding over the hill, and when he finally appeared, he was dragging an incredibly large sack behind him. "Can anyone use these sounds?" he puffed, mopping his forehead. "They came over the hill at once, and none of them are awful enough for me." The soundkeeper peered into the sack, and there were all the sounds which had burst from the vaults. "How nice of you to return them!" she cried happily. "You and the doctor must come by for an evening of beautiful music when my fortress is repaired." The thought of it so horrified the den that he excused himself immediately and dashed off down the road in a great panic. "I hope I haven't offended him," she said with some concern. "He only likes unpleasant sounds," volunteered Talk. "Ah, yes," she sighed. "I keep forgetting that many people do, but I suppose they are necessary, for you never really know how pleasant one was unless you knew how unpleasant it wasn't." "Well, that's true." She paused for a moment, then continued, "If only Rhyme and Reason were here, I'm sure things would improve." "Well, that's why we're going to rescue them," said Milo proudly. "What a long and hard journey that will be! You'll need some nourishment," she cried, handing Milo a small brown package, neatly wrapped and tied with string. "Now remember, they're not for eating, but for listening, for you'll often be hungry for sounds as well as food. Here are street noises at night, train whistles a long way off, dry leaves burning, busy department stores, crunching toast, creaking bed springs, and of course, all kinds of laughter. There's a little of each, and in a far-off, lonely places, I think you'll be glad to have them." "I'm sure we will," replied Milo gratefully. "Just take this road to the sea and turn left," she told them. You'll soon be in Digitopolis." And almost before she had finished, they had said goodbye and left the valley behind them. The shoreline was peaceful and flat, and the calm sea bumped it playfully along the sandy beach. The distance, a beautiful island covered with palm trees and flowers, beckoned invitingly from the sparkling water. Now, before we continue reading, let's look. So we left the Soundkeeper's fortress. We're coming to the sea. Here's the sea. And she said left, and then we'll get to Digitopolis. So this is kind of where we are, right? All right, let's continue. Nothing can possibly go wrong now, cried the humbug, and as soon as he'd said it, he leaped from his car as if stuck by a pin and sailed all the way to the little island. And we'll have plenty of time, answered Talk, who hadn't noticed the bug was missing, and he, too, suddenly leaped into the air and disappeared. It certainly couldn't be a nicer day, agreed Milo, who was too busy looking at the road to see that the others had gone, and in a split second he was gone also. He landed next to Talk and the terrified humbug on the tiny island, which now looked completely different. Instead of palm trees and flowers, there were only rocks and twisted stumps of long-dead trees. It certainly didn't seem like the place they had seen from the road. So here they are. They've all jumped out of the car, not on purpose, and landed on this island. Let's see if there's an island that we can see. Well, I see this island that says conclusions. So I want you to pause and think. They've all leapt or jumped to conclusions. What does that mean? Let's keep reading for a little while, and then we'll go back and see what they meant. Okay? He landed, we already said that. Pardon me, said Milo to the first man who happened by. Can you tell me where I am? Pardon me, replied the man. Can you tell me who I am? The man was dressed in a shaggy tweed jacket and with knickers and long woolen socks and a cap that had a peak both in the front and the back, and he seemed confused as could be. You must know who you are, said Milo impatiently. You must know who you are, he replied with equal annoyance. Oh dear, this is going to be difficult, Milo whispered to Talk. I wonder if we can help him. They conferred for a few minutes, and finally the bug looked up and said, Can you describe yourself? Indeed, said the man, replied happily. I'm as tall as can be. And he grew straight up until all that could be seen of him were shoes and stockings. And I'm as short as can be. And he shrank down to the size of a pebble. I'm as generous as can be, he said, handing each of them a large red apple. And I'm as selfish as can be, he snarled, grabbing them all back again. I'm as strong as can be, he roared, lifting an enormous boulder over his head. And I'm as weak as can be, he gasped, staggering under the weight of his hat. I'm as smart as can be, he remarked in 12 different languages. And I'm as stupid as can be, he admitted, putting both feet into one shoe. I'm as grateful as can be, he hummed, balancing on one toe. Graceful. And I'm as clumsy as can be, he cried, sticking his thumb in his eye. I'm as fast as can be, he announced, running all over around the island in no time at all. And I'm as slow as can be, he complained, waving goodbye to his snail. Is that any help to you? Once again they conferred in busy whispers until all three agreed. It's very simple, said the humbug, twirling his cane. If everything you say is true, then without a doubt, Milo concluded brightly, you must be, can be. Yeah, of course. Of course, yes, of course, the man shouted. Why didn't I think of that? I'm as happy as can be. And then he sat down and put his head in his hand and sighed. And now I'm also as sad as can be. Can you tell me where we are? Asked Talk as he looked around the desolate island. To be sure, said Canby. You're on the island of conclusions. Make yourself at home. You're apt to be here for some time. Well, how do we get here? Asked Milo, who was still a bit puzzled by it all. You jumped, of course, explained Canby. That's the way most everyone gets here. It's really quite simple. Every time you decide something without having a good reason, you jump to conclusions, whether you like it or not. It's such an easy trick to make. I've been here hundreds of times. So again, I want you to think about it. When we say you jump to conclusions, that's what we mean. We say, oh, don't jump to conclusions. We mean to decide something without having a good reason. And let's look back to what they said that sent them there. So the humbug said, nothing can possibly go wrong now. So he just said that. Did he have a reason to believe that? No. Things have gone wrong a whole bunch. So he jumped to conclusions. And then Talk said, and we'll have plenty of time. Does Talk for sure know that? I mean, he is a watchdog, but no, something else could go wrong. So he didn't have a reason, a really good reason to say that, so he jumped to conclusions. And then Milo said there certainly couldn't be a nicer day. Well, how does he know? Maybe there could be. And so they have jumped to conclusions. They were jumping to conclusions with what they said, and now they physically, with their body, jumped to an island called conclusions. Right? That's our wordplay. All right, let's come back to this. But this is such an unpleasant-looking place, Milo remarked. Yes, that's true, admitted Canby. It does look much better from a distance. As he spoke, at least 8 or 9 people sailed onto the island from every direction possible. Well, I'm going to jump right back, announced the humbug, who took 2 to 3 practice spins, leaped as far as he could, and then landed in a heap 2 feet away. That won't do at all, scolded Canby, helping him to his feet. You can never jump away from conclusions. Getting back is not so easy. That's why we're terribly crowded here. And that was certainly the truth. For along the bleak shore and clustered on the rocks for as far as anyone could see were enormous crowds of people, all sadly looking out to the sea. Isn't there even a boat? Asked Milo, anxious to get on with his trip. Oh, no, replied Canby, shaking his head. The only way back is to swim, and that is a very long and very hard way. I don't like to get wet, moaned the unhappy bug, and he shuddered at the thought. Neither do they, said Canby sadly. That's what keeps them here. But I wouldn't worry too much about it, for you could swim all day in the sea of knowledge and still come out completely dry. Most people do. But you must excuse me now. I have to greet the new arrivals. As you know, I'm friendly as can be. I want you to think about that. That's the question. I'll go back and read it in a second, okay? But we'll continue. I'll finish this chapter. Over the humbug's strenuous objections, Milo and Talk decided to swim, and, protesting loudly, the bug was dragged along with them towards the sea. Canby hurried off to answer more questions, and the last thing he was heard to say was, Pardon me, can you tell me who I am? They swam and swam and swam and swam for what felt like hours, and only Talk's firm encouragement kept Milo struggling through the icy water. At last they reached the shore, thoroughly exhausted, and, except for the bug, completely soaked. That wasn't bad at all, said Humbug, straightening his tie and brushing himself off. I must visit there again. I'm sure you will, gasped Milo, but from now on, I'm going to have a very good reason before I make up my mind about anything. You can lose too much time jumping to conclusions. The car was just where they left it, and in a moment they were on their way again as the road turned away from the sea and began its long climb into mountains. The warm sun and billowing breezes dried them as they went. I hope we reach Digitopolis soon, said Milo, thinking of the breakfast they hadn't eaten. I wonder how far it is. So we're going to go to the dodecahedron leads the way. Next, there are two thoughts I want us to keep in mind, and you can comment on either one. All right? One, because there are 2 lessons that you could learn from this chapter, like that Norton Juster tells you something that you could think about more and learn from. The one that I want you to think about right now, the first one is this one. You can swim all day in the sea of knowledge and still come out completely dry. Most people do. So I want you to think, what does that mean? You can swim all day in the sea of knowledge and come out completely dry. All right, and then the other thing I want you to keep in mind is this one. But from now on, I'm going to have a very good reason before I make up my mind about anything. You can lose too much time jumping to conclusions. Right? So what does that lesson mean? So you could choose either one to tell me about what do you think that means. Why do you think that that's the lesson that you can learn from this chapter? Okay? Both of them. And we will start here in Digitopolis on Wednesday. Thanks for joining me, Cubs.